This is the Ted Wallison Podcast. Brought to you by Haldanes, the meat people. Enjoy their award-winning products at selected Metro, Sobeys, Fortinos, and Foodland locations. Haldanes, the way sausage should taste. And Tom's Place. For the finest in men's clothing at unbeatable prices, it's Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market. Tom's Place will suit you. And now, here's Ted Wallison.
My special guest today has hosted 3 award-winning programs on CBC Radio, O'Reilly on Advertising, The Age of Persuasion, and currently Under the Influence. In addition, he is a best-selling author of The Age of Persuasion and This I Know. His latest book is titled My Best Mistake. And if that isn't enough, he has won literally hundreds of awards for his work in advertising, and his podcasts have been downloaded more than 40 million times. Clearly, he is an overachiever. He is the very talented Terry O'Reilly. Hello, Terry. How are you?
I'm good, Ted. How are you doing?
I'm very well. Nice to chat with you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I really enjoyed the book. It's a lot of fun to read. There are some great stories there, and it's really inspirational in that it talks about my best mistake, people who screw up, who end up getting goodness out of bad, and that's inspirational.
Well, that was why I wanted to write the book. I decided to chase 2 different kinds of mistakes, Ted. One where someone made a catastrophic career mistake, where they lost their job, their credibility, their revenue, everything. And it ended up being the best thing that ever happened to them. Mm-hmm. And then the second kind of mistake I chased was the opposite of that, where it was a tiny, almost insignificant mistake that someone didn't even really notice. And then that turned into something huge and big and the best thing that ever happened to them.
So this wasn't necessarily inspired the book on a mistake or mistakes that you have personally made in your career?
Well, I certainly made them in my career. I was always fascinated. And if you listen to my podcast, if you're a frequent listener, you'll know that I am. Well, thank you for that. You'll know that I'm insatiably curious about how people solve creative problems and how they bounce back and how they have kind of a Lazarus resurrection when everything goes wrong. So I just can't get enough of that kind of learning.
I'm always fascinated by dedications in the front of books, and yours is quite intriguing and probably frightening for some. And I'm going to quote it: "To the worst boss I ever had, who taught me the best lesson, how not to do it." Now, I'm imagining everyone with you, whomever you've worked, for whomever you've worked over the years, is sitting there going, is that SOB talking about me?
Well, it's a true dedication in that I had a job once in my career where the company I worked for really didn't know how to encourage creativity or inspire, and they didn't take good care of their clients. And at the time, I hated the job. I really did. In hindsight, I learned so much about running a company that when I started my own company many years later, I couldn't believe the amount of lessons I took with me, where in the middle of that pain, it felt like there was no learning. But in hindsight, there was a ton of learning.
Are people guessing or trying to guess who this boss may have been?
No names. I'll protect.
No, okay. All right, fair enough. It's interesting because when you talk about mistakes, sometimes mistakes happen in people's lives that aren't their fault. And to give you a perfect case in point, the story of a Montreal Canadian Hall of Famer, Serge Savard.
Yeah.
He didn't do anything wrong, but he almost lost a career over it.
It's so true. I mean, that's a great story where the Montreal Canadiens were being run by Sam Pollock, the legendary general manager, Sam Pollock. And he had a great farm system going in the NHL long before the draft system was in place. So they would bring all these young French-Canadian hockey players down to Montreal and spread them around their farm teams. And then from those farm teams, he would pick 12 players to bring up to the junior Canadians. And that season in the early 60s, he cut Serge Savard. He was the first cut he made. He said, I don't want him. So that was probably in May of the end of the hockey season. When September rolled around, Scotty Bowman, who was the head scout, got a call from Serge Savard saying, hey, I'm back in town, because he lived 370 miles away, and said, I'm ready for the season. I'm in the boarding house. Can you send me some money and get me set up? And Scotty Bowman just paused for a moment on the phone. Cliff Fletcher was his right-hand man. And they realized the mistake they had made in that moment, which was they forgot to tell Serge Savard he was cut from the team. So they were afraid to tell Sam Pollock that they had forgot to tell Serge. They eventually did tell Sam. Sam was not happy, told him, too bad, I don't want him. Scotty convinced Sam Pollock to keep Serge Savard till at least Christmas. If they could find a spot for him on another team, could they at least keep him till Christmas? And Sam Pollock just thundered, only till Christmas. And of course, in that span of time, Serge Savard excelled. He was the highest scorer. He was a team leader. He became the team captain. He became the rookie of the year. They brought him up to the Habs. And he had, and I'll just read you very quickly, Ted, his accomplishments when you think about the fact he was almost cut from the team.
Yeah.
He won the Stanley Cup in his first year. In the second year, the Habs won the Cup again. Savard was the MVP in the playoffs. He ended up playing 14 seasons with the Habs, winning 8 cups, became the captain of the Habs, became the general manager of the Habs, won 2 more cups, inducted into the Hall of Fame, and they retired his jersey. All would not have happened if Scotty had not made that mistake and then tried to salvage his career. The funny bookend to this story, as you may have read, Ted, is on the end of Savard's career, when he retired, Montreal Canadiens made another mistake. They forgot to file his retirement papers. So unbeknownst to Savard, he became a free agent when he thought he was retiring, and he got picked up by the Winnipeg Jets. So he ended up playing 2 more years. Some mistakes on both ends of his career.
Amazing how a corporation and a team so successful could be so silly.
So true.
Yeah. There's some great stories of families in here. The one that comes to my mind specifically is the Swanson family, who fed so many of our families over the years.
So true. So that's a great story too. So they had made a huge miscalculation for the American Thanksgiving one year. And their mistake was they ordered too much turkey. And when I say too much, they ordered 260 tons of turkey, too much. So they didn't know what to do with it. It was going to cost them a lot of money. They didn't have any facilities to keep them frozen. So they came up with an idea of putting them in refrigerated rail cars. The rail cars had to keep moving in order for the refrigeration to work. So these turkeys were crisscrossing the country while Swanson tried to decide what they could do with the turkey. One of their salespeople had just been on an airplane, and he'd been served airplane food in a little tin tray. And he had an idea on the plane. So he brought the tray back to the Swanson headquarters and said, what if we could create a frozen dinner with trays with compartments? So a compartment for turkey, a compartment for potatoes, dressing, gravy. And then if we could figure this out, then that might be a way that we could use all this turkey. So the chefs at the Swanson got to work on it because they had to figure out a way, Ted, on how everything could cook at the same rate, right? Because the whole thing goes in the oven at the same time. So potatoes have to cook at the same rate as the turkey. But the genius of that idea was the fact that they called it a TV dinner. They linked it in 1954, which was the year this all happened, to this brand new piece of technology that was in everybody's living room. Yep. That seemed futuristic and wonderful. And even the box of the package design of Swanson looked like a TV set. It had an oval screen and 2 little tuning knobs and faux wood grain. But that whole thing, and that became a phenomenon, right? I mean, they sold tens of millions of frozen TV Swanson dinners, all because of that mistake they made in ordering too much turkey in 1954.
Yeah. And the interesting thing was, at the time, they weren't the first ones to come up with the idea of frozen foods. Birdseye had done that years before, but they took it to a totally different level, and again, purely accidentally.
I think they certainly weren't the first to do that. They weren't even the first to put it in trays, but it was linking it to television that was the genius. That was really what kicked them through the goalposts.
Talking to Terry O'Reilly, broadcaster and author of his latest book, My Best Mistake, Epic Fails and Silver Linings. There's another kind of family that you talk about in your book as well. Not a real family, but one that's close to many of us, the Corleones. And specifically their creator, Mario Puzo, who was just a notorious gambler. And boy, did he get himself into some serious trouble. Surprising that he managed to live.
It's true, because by his own admission, he called himself a chooch, and he said every family has a chooch, which is the person that never in their family that never gets their act together.
Yeah.
So he was always borrowing money from his siblings, from his friends, from banks, and then he made a mistake and borrowed from loan sharks, because he was always having to borrow money to pay off the debt of the debt of the debt, and the interest and the VIG and all of that would add up. So he borrows money from loan sharks, and now, as you know, loan sharks are not quite as kind as family member would be about getting repaid. So he had written 2 books previously that had not done well. He'd only made $3,000 from each of them in royalties. So he decided he had to write another book quickly, just so he could get an advance payment, an advance on his book. So he managed to get a $5,000 advance, and he quickly wrote this book originally called Mafia, which he didn't really even care about. He was just really after the advance money. Then he went to Hollywood, met with Robert Evans, the famous producer, and said, I'm in big trouble. He knew Evans was also a gambler and that he would understand this. He said, I need money quick because I think they're going to break my arm. So Evans said, I get it, from one gambler to another, and gave him an advance of $12,500. So, and then he sold the rights to The Godfather to Paramount, and the rest is history. So this book he was dashing off, that he felt was below his gifts, that he didn't spend any time reading. He based it all on research. He didn't know anybody in the mafia. He was just after the advance money, ends up being the best thing that ever happened to him, because it became a phenomenon. The Godfather is still a phenomenon it even changed the word Godfather in our world. Yeah. You would never say someone's your Godfather anymore, would you?
And the word mafia doesn't show up in the book at all.
Mafia is never uttered once in The Godfather.
And boy, there were some problems with the making of that film, with Marlon Brando to begin with. The producers, they didn't want him. Nobody wanted Marlon Brando. They thought he was washed up.
Well, it was one of those films that almost should not have been made, because, Mario Puzo just dashed it off. Coppola was really kind of an unknown director. Marlon Brando was unemployable at that stage of his career. Pacino was an unknown. James Caan had done maybe one movie. Robert Duvall had a couple. There was nothing really going for that film other than this perfect alchemy of everybody coming together and it just being magical.
Yeah, it's an incredible story. Well, you have a direct involvement from your years in the advertising industry, that being Fiberglass Pink.
Right. So for years, Ted, I wrote all the advertising in the 80s for Fiberglass Pink home insulation. I remember the client gave us the best brief of all time. He said to us in the boardroom one day, I sell the world's most boring product. You buy it once in your life, you put it between the walls, and you never see it again. Make me famous.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is just the best brief in the world. I've never forgotten it. And I'm going to take a beat back now. So fiberglass insulation, all insulation back in the day, Ted, was all the same color. It was all white or just slightly off-white. And Fiberglass decided they wanted their product to stand out in the marketplace. So they decided to dye it red. Their logo was red. They thought, let's dye it red. In the dyeing process, something went wrong. A mistake was made, and all of this insulation came out pink. And Fiberglass was mortified because their clientele were contractors. And, pink at that time was not a masculine color. So they were terrified that no one would buy it. They had to put it out in the marketplace because they had made so much of it, but they apologized to contractors saying, sorry, this is pink. It's supposed to be red. The next shipment will be red. Again, we apologize. And the most amazing thing happened. The contractors loved the color pink. They said, no. We want more of that pink stuff. We love it. So Fiberglass said, okay. So they started to manufacture more pink fiberglass. And I have to tell you something as a marketer. Pink was the thing that we branded that product with. It was just, there's something about that color. We did pink flamingos in the TV ads. We did pink print ads. The Pink Panther became the iconic symbol for it. It just worked. And when we worked on that, Ted, in Canada, after a couple of years of those kind of really fun commercials, they eventually had over 70% of the insulation market. One brand.
That's quite amazing. And how difficult was it to get the rights to the Pink Panther?
It was done out of the States. The American side of the company did that negotiation, Ted. So I don't think it was difficult, but I think it's one of the longest, I know it's one of the longest running mascots in marketing history. So I have to think, whoever owns I can't remember the studio, it might be MGM now, who owns that Pink Panther imagery has made money for decades off that.
Yeah, and talk about colors. The Incredible Hulk, as we all know, is this green monster, was not supposed to be green, and yet I imagine reading your book, the original color for the Hulk, I think, no, it can't be that color. It could never be that color.
So true.
Because that's not the real color.
So true.
Is it?
Well, yes. So Stan Lee, when he was a kid, he loved monster movies. He loved Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So years later, when he was working for Marvel, he was coming up with an idea for a comic, and he called it The Amazing Hulk, where a normal person would transform into this huge monster when he got angry, and he couldn't control when that happened, just like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, a person with two personalities. So he decided he wanted to make the Hulk, when he turned into the Hulk, make the Hulk a very unusual color. He wanted it to be an inhuman color. So he chose gray because it's kind of ghoulish and weird and not human at all. But when the first comic book was printed, the printer made a huge mistake. So when Stan Lee got the comic and he's flipping through it, on one page, the Hulk was light gray. On the next page, he was dark gray. On the next page, he was black. And he called the printer up. He said, "What happened?" And the printer said, "I'm sorry. Gray is one of the toughest colors to print. We made a mistake." Stan Lee said, "Can you guarantee it won't be a mistake going forward?" And he said, "No, we can't. You have to pick another color." And Stan said, "Okay, what color can I pick? That isn't going to be trouble." And the printer said, "Any color but gray." So Stan Lee thought for 1.5 seconds or 2 seconds and said, "Okay, green. Let's make them green." That's how much thought went into it. And that color, Ted, became such a part of the persona of the Hulk to this day, all based on a printing mistake.
Ted Woloshyn returns in a moment.
Hey, let me take a moment to tell you about my friends at Haldanes. They are the meat people. You know, I've been a fan of their products for years now, and without a doubt, they make some of the best sausage in Ontario. They are multiple award winners, having captured the Ontario's Finest Meat Competition's coveted Award of Excellence on 3 occasions, in addition to dozens of individual product awards. Haldanes has also received the Grand Champion ribbon at the past 2 Royal Winter Fair's ready-to-eat meat snack competitions. So whether you're preparing a charcuterie board or a full-blown sit-down dinner for your friends or family, you'll find Haldanes' award-winning products at fine meat shops throughout the province, now including selected Metro, Sobeys, Fortino's, and Foodland stores, along with their 7 Haldanes locations. Their barbecued kielbasa is my favorite. On a fresh bun with horseradish, it is out of this world. But don't just take my word for it. Judge for yourself. On your barbecue, in your kitchen, or straight from the refrigerator. Haldanes, the way sausage should taste. And once again, joining me from Tom's Place, Tom Mahalik, 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market. The weather's warmed up significantly. Boy, you can smell weddings in the air, can't you, Tom?
100%, and our wedding business has been quite strong. And I would like to tell our customers and friends that at Tom's Place, we know how to sell a tuxedo. A lot of the regular stores don't even carry tuxedos. Tom's Place has a great selection of fabulous and fantastic tuxedos at prices that we can all afford. You're looking for a peak lapel, a shawl lapel, a notch lapel, blue, black. Tom's Place has great selection. And at Tom's Place, we have the staff that are knowledgeable. We have the tailors to make sure that your clothing is ready on time. And if you're looking for your groomsmen, we have suits in 7 or 8 different colors that will suit them. So please, for all your wedding needs, come to Tom's Place, where we still have people picking up the phone and answering your questions and your call. No email, shmemail, your mail, who's there, who's not there. We're in the store.
All right, 190 Baldwin is where you'll find Tom's Place in the heart of Kensington Market.
Now back to Ted Wallachin.
Terry O'Reilly is my guest. He is the author of My Best Mistake, Epic Fails and Silver Linings. Because we're Canadian and Canadians love to talk about weather, we've got to talk about the Farmer's Almanac, which I still have conversations to this day. We had on this program not long ago the senior climatologist from Environment Canada, Dave Phillips, and I talked to him about the Farmer's Almanac. And, of course, they look at it from a different perspective than a lot of other people. Some people swear by the Farmer's Almanac.
Totally.
And yet they made one of the biggest mistakes ever, which somehow turned into one of the best things that could ever happen.
So true. So in around 1815, so this has been around a long time, this publication. In 1815, they were putting together their issue, and they were going to make weather forecasts, which they had always made. They didn't have a forecast for the month of July yet, so they left a blank space for that forecast so that they would slot in just before it went to the printers. And a young intern, for fun, slotted in snow for July, just because he knew that was a placeholder, that it would eventually be changed. And of course, when it went to print, it never did get changed. Everybody forgot about it. So when it was issued, it said it was going to snow in July. And suddenly the Farmer's Almanac, which was this, very respectable publication, was the laughingstock of the country because, of course, it never snows in July. But that summer, there was a huge volcano eruption in Indonesia that sent, I guess, ash all around the world. And it changed and altered weather patterns in 1815. And wouldn't you know it, it snowed in July. So from that point on, everybody just bowed at the feet of the almanac because they made such an outrageous prediction. It was a mistake. And people thought, boy, if you can predict that, you are the go-to for weather. To this day, it is revered for its weather predictions.
Yeah, and it still has that little hole in the corner that you can hang. You can put some string through it and hang it on a nail somewhere in a wall.
That's right. They say it's for farmers, really, that they hang it in the barns.
One of the most fascinating people that you write about in the book, and there are many of them, but one of them I think, and maybe because I'm a big fan of Family Guy, is Seth MacFarlane. And I never realized how brilliant he was at such a young age.
He is a young phenom. I mean, he truly was at that time, I guess, the youngest showrunner in Hollywood. So he has built up this incredible empire, Family Guy, and all his other shows. He directs movies, he records record albums because he's a singer. Yep. I mean, he has built up. I think his contract was worth something like $100 million at one point. He is a major force in Hollywood. He started doing it in his early 20s. He has built up this amazing industry around him. And as I say in the book, none of that would have happened if he had not made a mistake back in 2001. So he had a little bit of success in Hollywood at that point, just a small amount of success. And he was invited back to his college in Rhode Island to give an inspiring speech to the students, which he did. That night, he went out with the faculty and some of the students and got drunk. So the next morning, he was to fly back to Los Angeles from the Boston airport, but he overslept because he was hungover. He got to the airport late and missed his flight.
Yeah.
He was completely hungover. When he missed his flight, he went, okay. He booked another one for a couple of hours later at Logan Airport in Boston to fly back to LA. Then he went and fell asleep in the lounge because he was completely hungover. And he woke up not long after to all this hubbub going on in the lounge. And he looked up at the television set in the corner, and it was the morning of 9/11. And he realized in that moment that the first plane that hit the towers was the plane he was supposed to be on. So because of a mistake, he literally lived and then went on to create this incredible industry around him.
Yeah. As you mentioned, he's not a brand. He is an industry because not only did he bring us Family Guy, but American Dad, The Cleveland Show, and the Orville. It's quite amazing when you think of the amount of talent that a guy like he possesses.
And he does most of the voices in all those shows.
That's right. And then you read another chapter about Steve Jobs, who's brilliant in a totally different way. A marketer, probably someone after your heart.
Yeah.
But not the creative guy, which you actually are both.
He's a very interesting guy because he changed the world. So he's on a different level. I worked for Apple's advertising agency in the 80s. So we had a lot of Steve Jobs stories front and center at our agency. Mm. He was a very difficult personality. I mean, he would fire people in the elevator, right, Ted? Like when he was waiting for the elevator at Apple, nobody wanted to get in the elevator with him. But he made a big mistake in 1984. He wanted to bring over a CEO to run the place so he could concentrate on creating new devices and new products. He set his sights on John Scully, who was the chief marketer at Pepsi. Scully was kind of on the fast track to run Pepsi one day, but Steve Jobs wanted to woo him over to Apple. And he persisted. I mean, he gave one of the greatest elevator pitches of all time to Scully that changed Scully's mind eventually. And he said to him, do you want to just sell sugared water or do you want a chance to change the world? And that line, Scully said, it was like a punch in the gut to him. And it was that moment where he decided to leave Pepsi and his fast track to the presidency of Pepsi and go over to the pirate ship, which was Apple in California. So the mistake that Jobs made was hiring Scully because he wasn't a good fit and they didn't really get along. And he pursued him all this time and it ended up being a horrible relationship to the point where Scully fired Steve Jobs from Apple. And I mean, talk about a mistake. He pursued him like crazy and then he became the guy that fired him from his own company. Then Steve Jobs went off into the wilderness for a couple of years, started another company that didn't go well called Next, but then made his way back to Apple and was, he'd learned a lot in that time he was away and learned to tone down his personality. And he learned, a lot of aspects of running a business. So when he came back to Apple, that was the renaissance of Apple. It became the company it is today under Jobs. Think about, he revolutionized 5 industries, Ted, when he came back, phones and television and retail stores and music. It was an unbelievable resurrection of his career, but all because he got fired from Apple, that he was able to become this other guy when he came back.
And again, the connection here between Seth MacFarlane and Steve Jobs is the Super Bowl. Apple launched Macintosh in 1984 Super Bowl with a commercial that the board of directors was totally against, did not want to run.
That's so true. There is a parallel there. That commercial you referenced from Apple, that Apple did not want to run, that the board of directors were hated, that only Steve Jobs and the advertising agency liked. That commercial, directed by Ridley Scott, and if any of your listeners have never seen that commercial, they should YouTube it. Just YouTube Apple 1984. That commercial changed everything. Yeah. In my industry. For one thing, it showed us ad people that you could have a commercial that had those kind of production values. It was directed by Ridley Scott and it looked like a feature motion picture. It changed everything. It also changed the Super Bowl. It was really when ads became an event on the Super Bowl. Prior to that, Ted, people just ran their normal commercials on the Super Bowl that they had been running all year.
Well, I think it's true to say that people will tune in. Some people tune in to Super Bowl for either the ads or the halftime show and couldn't give a tinker's damn about what happens on the field.
And that's the only program ever where that happens.
And it's still the number one ranked television program in North America year after year after year by far.
By far, because it always gets over 100 million viewers.
Do you miss working the ad agency, the industry?
I would say no. I worked in it for many decades, but when in 2012 I was done, I was finished, and I loved my career, but I was ready to go. But I'll say the one thing I miss is working with actors, because I was a commercial director for the last 25 years of my career. Yep. I once did the math, Ted, between 1990 and when I retired from advertising full time in 2012. I directed close to 14,000 commercials or 13,500 commercials. And I work with a lot of actors when you do that many commercials. And I loved being in the studio with actors, voiceovers. You and I worked together in some spots. I just loved working with talented actors. That's the thing I miss.
You started Pirate Radio, which, and I mean this in a complimentary fashion, was an unconventional agency.
It was because nobody had really dedicated. First of all, let me say this. Radio, when I got into the industry, recording radio was the least desirable thing to do from an agency point of view. Television was glamorous, print was fun. Radio was always recorded in basements somewhere in the city with no lights, no windows. If you were there all day, they'd give you a greasy fast food menu and you have to pick something and hope everybody in the room was okay with that restaurant. Then a greasy little bag of food would come in. We wanted to do it differently. So we created studios with windows, with sunlight, and we decorated them not like the deck of the Starship Enterprise, but more like a cottage, so bright and comfortable. We brought in 5-star catering every day, Ted. Everybody had 5-star catering for lunch and dinner. We fed our staff and our clients breakfast in the morning. And what I did was, one of the things Pirate did, which was unusual, was we started working with Hollywood actors. Because a lot of Hollywood actors were affordable, and we had the technology to patch into LA studios. So we really got the Canadian advertising world to rethink radio, that it could actually be fun, could be exciting, you could use the best talent, it doesn't have to be done in a dungeon. So everything about that was unusual at that time.
Yeah. You created some brilliant things, which I mentioned at the outset, which is why you were the winner of hundreds of radio awards. Well, I really enjoyed reading the book. It's a lot of fun. It's got some great stories and terrific insight. There's obviously a lot of research that went into this, and I'm a big fan of Under the Influence. I listen to it late at night as I lie in bed, and I think to myself, wow, how did he find that out?
Thank you, Ted. That's high praise coming from you. I appreciate it.
I appreciate the time, Terry. All the best to you, my friend. Thank you.
Thanks, Dad.
All right. Terry O'Reilly, the author of The Big Mistake, Epic Fails and Silver Linings. Thanks again, Terry. Take care.
Thanks, Ted. Always great to talk to you.
All right. Look forward to the next time.
The Ted Wallacham Podcast has been brought to you by Haldanes, the Meat People. Enjoy their award-winning products at selected Metro, Sobeys, Fortinos, and Foodland locations. Haldanes, the way sausage should taste. And Tom's Place. For the finest in men's clothing at unbeatable prices, it's Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market. Tom's Place will suit you. The Ted Wallacham Podcast is produced by Joey Roselli. Technical production by Paul Gatt. Music by Bike Thieves. I'm Becky Coles. Submit your questions and comments to ted@twmedia.ca.